So we're going to draw our testimony time of worship to a close. As Stephen and I were reflecting on how we love from our perspective to celebrate and share what we've seen in the Lord at work, the word celebration is really what did come to mind. And so, let's scoot back a minute. And so we're going to celebrate a lot of folks. In fact, pretty much everybody in this room. One group that we're going to celebrate right away, though, before they get sent. Almost everybody here, to some degree, is probably part of our children's ministry in some way. Whether you participate in it by volunteering your children to be part of it, or by being a volunteer. And so it's wild to think of the transition it's been from people who have passed hands or people who have been intentional. I mean, we're going to talk about the different spaces we've met in, but children's ministry used to be it felt like 80 kids in the G's sunroom screaming at each other while we tried to corral them, which isn't super different than what we do now. But we've got a lot more kids. It's a lot more fun. But we, right off the bat, would love to celebrate. Actually, ironically, as we send them off, Randy has stewarded our children's ministry for a really long time, and even just this year has let that go and diversified it. And so you can celebrate her, as well as all the volunteers, everybody who participates. Thank you so much. And then, of course, for Olivia and Seth and Hope and Kevin and Zoe Brown and all of our volunteers who are stepping into that space to be intentional to serve our families well. Thank you all for saying yes to that. And with that announcement, kids, you can now leave. No, we're going to send the walkers to 6 years old with Randy and with Paul. So if you guys want to jump up and follow Randy and Paul, if you'll raise your hand. And Randy in the white jacket.
As the kiddos are kind of following Paul and Randy's lead, something that was in our hearts from the very beginning, I think there's kind of two things regarding kids at DelCo. One is that DelCo, the church family, would be a safe place where kids feel loved. And it's been awesome to hear the testimony of parents who've come here and say, honestly, there's been some parents that say, the only reason we're coming back is because my kids feel loved here. It wasn't necessarily anything else that happened. But secondly, what's been exciting is there's so many new parents in this room, and our heart has been that parents would be the primary place, the primary people taking responsibility for the discipleship of their children. And over this past year especially, it's been a delight to do that as friends, as co-laborers in Christ, as we're trying to figure out how to do this well. And we ask questions to the Perrys. How do you do this? Right? You guys are ahead of the curve on that. So that's been a delight to do this past year. All Chris? Yeah. So we'll celebrate the next group. When DelCo started, this ministry did not even exist. You know what it is?
Over 50 ministry.
The over 50 ministry. That's true. Greenhouse, that's also, actually, I guess there's a lot of things that didn't exist. Maybe ministry is not the right word. Music. Did you know we probably gathered for, how long did we gather before music even was? Susanna, years.
About 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. Susanna, I'll point her out too. She just brought up that she has pictures from when we gathered at DelCo's house. Shelly might too. At the G's house. DelCo pretty much owned that place for the first year. I would encourage you to ask her to look at those pictures. It's really sweet. But yeah, Gary and Anna kind of courageously stepped into a space to lead music when we did not have that. And in a lot of ways, you began to show our church regularly on a Sunday that we wanted to be a church community that would create space for people to explore gifts and lead out in new ways. You not only were leading out in music, but little did you know you were discipling our church and what it means to step into new areas. So if you want to give Gary and Anna, and then also Jesse, just a round of applause for what they are modeling, what Christ has been doing in their lives and in our church. So thank you guys.
We've met in a lot of different spaces. We started in the G's home. the DelCo's home. They were the only ones who had a home at the time. So it was really easy to pick a space. We actually really quickly started moving towards, if you guys know Mingo Park, their community center, we actually were in there for a while. I don't know if any of you besides Susanna actually would have experienced that. That was a pretty wild ride. And Jelly. Yeah, it was a pretty wild ride. We actually were adding people pretty rapidly. It was a good time. And then there was this thing, what's it called? COVID. So COVID happened. And we were like, I mean, we were unceremoniously asked to leave. Like, you just can't ever meet here again, basically. Which makes sense because nobody knew what was going to happen. And so I remember our last Sunday at the G's house before all the lockdowns and stuff started. And we were looking around like, we don't know what's going to happen. So really our second space that we met in was Zoom. Believe it or not, we did Zoom church for like 10 or 11 weeks straight, including Easter. And so that was a wild, I just can't even tell you. We actually had, the first time we had music was from Shelly's son Brandon and his wife. They did it over Zoom for Easter. And so he played the guitar into the microphone and they sang for us. And we all sang on mute to celebrate Easter. And I remember, as happy as Easter time was, admittedly, and not to be crass, but I was like, this sucks. This is not a good time. Pretty soon after that, we actually moved into the New Beginnings. If you guys know the church out on 36, they have an outdoor pavilion. We used that for a while. And I remember our setup team was just the McCains, the Andersons, and the G's. And we were setting up all of these tables. And here was our refrain anytime anyone ever asked to help us. No, we got it. Like, go do your thing. And so you may have heard us say that to you before. We've kind of started to grow out of that, which is really nice. But a guy who used to come to our church, Clint, lovingly confronted us and was like, hey, you have people who genuinely want to serve you and be part of this thing that you're doing, but every time they try, you go, no, it's okay, like, don't worry about it. Like, just go do this, do this, do this. And we felt pretty convicted about that. And so in terms of setup, it's been fun to see the evolution of that over time as we try to create structures into it. I went ahead and made it part of Greenhouse ministry requirements. And so anybody who has been part of Greenhouse, they've had to basically on their own with us and other volunteers, like, set up our space for almost, I mean, we're going to hit 2 years next month. And so if you enjoy what's happening here, we always want to do this, but celebrate the Greenhouse residents, celebrate everybody who's come. If you want to give them a round of applause, that would be huge. We're going to clap a lot today, unless you're not going to celebrate. Because they've done that pretty much on their own, whether we've had systems or not, different times of prayer, different expressions of what that's looked like. And then as we've moved here, it's gotten easier and more complicated, but whether it was the Unity Community Center soon after that or here, it's just been a wild 4 years. I do feel encouraged. There's a Congolese Alliance Church, or maybe an Alliance Church. I was talking to them at our Columbus meeting, and what did he tell me? In 2 years, they've moved 7 times, and they have 300 people. So right now, they're just happy to meet in 2 little rooms of a United Methodist church. And they're like, and the Lord is faithful. And I was like, I don't know how faithful I'd think the Lord is if that was happening to me. But it's just been a lot of fun to see the Lord's faithfulness at play.
Another thing we want to celebrate, what God has really baked into our culture from the beginning, is we gather around a meal after church. We'll be doing that today. The Crasses made food today. And the first meal was made in the G's home. What was beautiful about that is we could literally smell the food cooking as people were teaching. But the vision behind that was the early church broke bread, and that was honestly the expression of communion. And Brad so wonderfully has championed that the only reason we gather around a meal as a church family after our church service is because of what Christ did in creating this new family. So we've had this rhythm, this like beat, where after service we gather around tables, we sit together with our fellow DelCo family, with guests to the family, we break bread and we remember what Christ has done. And that's been made possible by the many different volunteers we've had who have brought food. I think almost everyone in this church has contributed in some way to bringing food at some point. Specifically, Hope and Brad, at the way beginning, were helping organize who was bringing food. Then Amy, the Henrys. I don't know if you guys remember the Henrys. They were a part of this church from the beginning. They just moved up to Spencer, Ohio. And then most recently, Chelsea's not here. Brandon, you can let Chelsea know that we're about to applaud her. She's been courageously kind of carrying that baton currently. But it has been a joy to gather at the tables. And what we found, this is something we'd often say at New City, sometimes the sermon that somebody needs to hear actually happens at the dinner table, the lunch table, from a brother or sister in Christ when somebody speaks a word in season, right? The Spirit moving through his people. So we've just been grateful for how God has worked at the tables and how that has been made possible by those who bring food. So I invite you all, give a round of applause to yourselves and to Chelsea, Amy, Hope, Brad.
Your hand's getting tired yet? To highlight leadership, I'm going in reverse order for some reason. I don't know why I wrote it this way, but Tim put this eloquently and well. Like, the number one thing that we've been taught about leadership, and I hope that you guys get to experience, is that we do believe that leadership is an expression of service and of the pouring out of people. And we didn't even know what that meant except for in the planting experience and having people do that for us, whether it was Tim or Yogi or Brian, Ed Mangum, and now with our current district superintendent, Jeff Miller, who just invest in us heavily and love us really well. It's just been really cool to see how leadership is being expressed in that way and how they've trusted us in this little group of what used to just be the McCains and Andersons and G's. We would just meet weekly and like simultaneously like pray and plan and complain. Maybe you've been in a meeting like that, and then complain about things that weren't going well and just try to like figure out together what it looks like, pray together, figure these things out. And then in the last year, as things have become more complex and beautiful, inviting the Perrys in as elders, inviting Brad back into that space as elders, and then Caroline is an elder in development. It's just been really cool, and then allowing the freedom of people who are stepping backwards to experience things, take a break, and now having new vision for what that looks like for their own lives. It's just been, I don't know, it's just been really cool. It'd be hard to imagine It'd be hard to imagine what it would look like to function interdependently and in mutual submission with anybody else. It's been a lot of fun. It's been really cool to see God's hand at work and how he does bless leadership to lead a community, how the little things that are in leaders are then mightily being expressed in the church. And as, again, we've transitioned through so many, and then new people are coming in with the leaders we're bringing up, whether it's Maddie serving on volunteer staff, the greenhouse residents, Brandon transitioning into a treasurer role that Haley filled for a season. It's just been a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun. And so thank you for everybody who stewards the role of leadership in our church. Thank you for everything that you've done. And as we move forward, I'm excited to continue to see what that looks like for all of us. But it's been a lot of fun. So round of applause for leaders, I guess. Yeah.
In some ways, it's interesting that the order fell where I'm celebrating Greenhouse. I'm going to throw Jordan in this too. Jordan and Maddie, more recently, have done a phenomenal job of creating a space to invite young, developing leaders in the church to have conversations where primarily formation is at the heart of it. I blanked on your name for a second. I don't know why I did, Tim. Tim talked about transformation, and that is at the heart of our conviction for what leadership development looks like. And in a lot of ways, Greenhouse residents, I would say you have kind of paved the way in modeling that for our church community and have played a huge part in that being like a cultural thing that people experience when they step into our church. So Greenhouse residents, I give you thanks for how you've modeled that, or not over just this past year, the past 2 years. You've stepped courageously into some conversations with family, with spouses, with each other, and that has been a gift to this church. Maddie and Jordan, thank you for creating space for that. And what has been beautiful, actually, we were just talking about this outside on the greeting team, is at a church, your hope is that, yes, you'll have spaces where there's a greeting team, or you'll have a space where there's leadership developments happening. You'll have a space where there's outreach. But the hope is that they're not just segmented into these separate areas of the church, right? You don't want a church where the only people who greet are outside the door of the greeting team, and then when people walk in, no one else is hospitable. You don't want leadership development to only be happening in a leadership development space. In fact, hopefully that's happening everywhere. And what's been beautiful as Maddie, Jordan, Greenhouse residents, you guys have championed that for our church from the beginning, and that really is being tasted throughout our church. So I'm grateful for how you have modeled that and created that space for our church to experience what God's heart is for the new upcoming generation of leaders, right? You guys will be carrying the church much farther, longer than we will, because you're the next generation. So thank you for that. So a round of applause for the young leader.
Only if you mean it. In terms of admin and design, this is somewhat self-congratulatory, but I was just like listing out things. It's been fun to do administrative stuff for the church. It's been fun to partner with a lot of that. We do think in terms of the other things that are happening in our community, again, with like Haley, who has served as our treasurer for a long time, and Brandon, who's transitioning into that role. And then, of course, they're not here, but like from an OVD perspective, we receive so much help from the district at large. Without their administrative support, we would be totally lost. We would be in big trouble. And that's been a lot of fun to partner with them. Thanks to Caroline. If there's anything beautiful in our church, it probably is because of Caroline in some way, because she's designed it. And that's been a lot of fun. And thanks to everybody who in small ways has said yes to little things of, I will do this, I'll fill out this form, I'll make this thing, I'll do whatever. We understand it's not our strength. Yes, Brad. Mallory taking pictures. If there are any pictures that are well done, it's because of Mallory. But seriously, if there's one thing that we underestimated in planting a church, it's the role of administration in keeping something going. It's certainly not our strength. We're learning a lot. We're always learning. We'd love to continue to learn from everybody here. It's been a wild ride. But just thank you for everybody who not only tolerates us, but also has contributed to our growth in that and given us the capacity to really just function well, so that the undercurrent of DelCo functioning well, so that as we are able to enter in with our hearts and minds, we can just be hospitable and not have to worry about all the crazy little things that are going on. So thank you, everybody who's contributed to that. If you want to give them a round of applause.
So at DelCo, we believe that probably the most important resource a church has to offer the city is the life of a disciple. And what's been beautiful is over the past year or so, we've had small groups form, and Brad and Haley would be grateful that there are now other homes in our church that can host church events. And we've been sitting in the backyard of the Franco's house. We've gathered at the Perry's new house and your old house, the Bears home we've been in more recently, the Crasses. There's been multiple homes in our church that have literally created a space where discipleship conversations can happen and where we can ask the question, how do we posture our lives to provide to people in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, our family members? How do we posture our lives in such a way where these individuals can have repeated opportunity to respond to what Jesus has for them, right? And that all starts with just people generously opening up their homes. So all those who've been involved with discipleship at DelCo, thank you for creating that space where God can really meet people where they're at and call them into this city that we all share. So round of applause for all y'all.
And last thing, and I neglected to put it up here, but one thing that has always been on our heart from the very beginning is asking the question of what it means to partner with the surrounding community and what's already going on. Because in our mind, in terms of divine expectation and engagement, we know that God has been at work in Delaware for a long time. It's not like we just showed up and suddenly like, now God's here, right? very silly. I've met people like that. But, and so we've always been had our eyes on the lookout for like who is really celebrating Delaware and who is really entering incarnationally in a way that we respect and want to partner with. And so there's a whole laundry list of people that we would thank in that space. Some of the first people that celebrated us were Rob and Julie Morgan at DCV, and being able to sit with them and them just encourage the heck out of us. And I still remember, you asked how many times, we came here 11 times, once a month for 11 months to figure out if Delaware was the place. And one of those meetings was with Rob Morgan, and we were kind of like simultaneously like learning about Delaware and also like, we don't know if we can do this. And Rob gently and kindly and firmly was like, well, the worst thing that could happen is you could die. And I remember at the time being like, what is that supposed to mean? But you know what's funny? I remember that so vividly, and that thought will pop in my head probably like once a month. Of just like, yeah, I'm not dead yet. This is great. Like, and even for the Christian then, as he would say, like, death is also a celebration, ironically. We're going to be fine. And so it's given us a lot of courage. So beyond them moving in with like emotionally focused, they really helped also support our church during COVID a lot in ways that would be hard to express and articulate. If you want to ask any questions about that, you're welcome to. It was a crazy time. Moving beyond that into our work with the Unity Community Center and Dream Center, who we love to support and who we now share this building with very crazily, and who kind of like put a roof over our heads as they hold on to the lease. And then moving beyond that into our missional partnerships with Cornerstone, with Hope Church, with the other Columbus churches, and even more recent ones like stuff that we're doing in the schools, with Young Life, with other ministries that we just love to partner with and love to celebrate because of everything that's going on. And so if there's one thing that we love, it's relationship. And then as that moves into mission and, as you said, transformation, it's just been gorgeous to see what the Lord has done with those sorts of things. And a lot of them over the long haul, right? Not very many of them, you know, Tim's joke was apt. Like 1,000 people have not shown up. I appreciate that. It has been, the ministry of DelCo has been a long haul kind of mentality, admittedly. And those are the kind of questions that we ask. What is the long-term vision of a place that's going to be transformational and blessing-oriented for a community? And then how do we figure out how to do that? I was even just listening to a podcast today. You know, for the last 3 years, one of the fastest growing places for the church is Iran, ironically. It's illegal to be a Christian in Iran. And what's happening in Iran is that as that condemnation is coming down and as they're being persecuted, they're creating these small, mighty, vibrant, spirit-filled communities with, as you might imagine, very few expectations of their rights or like what it would mean to be a Christian, because they can't really fight for those in any kind of meaningful way. And yet the Lord is doing incredible things in that country. And that does seem to be, you know, the church in America, it's a tide, it's an ebb and a flow. Right now we're kind of in an ebbing season in the American church, and that's fine. It does make us a little bit uncomfortable. I do think one of the ways that we are ebbing is towards smaller communities of I don't want to say more committed, highly committed, intentional discipleship communities that are seeking to bless the people around them. And to be honest, like what we've seen is that, this is a rant, I don't know why I'm moving in this direction, sorry. But what we are seeing is that is making it so that people who are less committed or maybe are asking, or who are maybe nominally Christian are moving away from churches. And to be honest, it seems like in terms of how the American church has come through history, but also the church throughout the world, that seems to be actually a good thing. That seems like that provides a lot of strength for the church. And hopefully it will be kind of like a bolstering for us as we consider what it means to reach Delaware with repeated opportunities to respond positively to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's the goal of all of our missional partnerships, is to figure out how we do that together as a community. And so I'm excited for the future and all those things. I'm excited already what's happening like in partnerships in Delaware, and even new things that are happening next, like at a meeting I'm going to next week. So it's just been a lot of fun to find your people in Delaware and to celebrate them well. So if you want to lift up a praise and like an applause, do what? I said good one. For our missional partnerships.
So today, we actually are going to do a response time. In a lot of ways, this whole service up to this point has kind of been an application of, in Scripture, we see that altar building is something that was practiced in memory of what God has done, how He's proven Himself faithful, and it continues to be a touch point. So for our response time, we are actually going to invite you all to build an altar with us. So there's two ways you can participate in this. You can build your personal altar. So Gary and Jordan are passing out stones because they literally built them with stones. And the invitation would just be during this time, we'll play some music. Write on your stone words, phrases. If you're artistic, you can draw a picture of what God has done in your life this past year. Things you're thankful for. Things that you want to remember how God has been faithful. And then over here on this table, it'll say DelCo Family Altar. If you're at a table that does not say DelCo Family Altar, you're at the wrong table. But there's a table over here, there'll be Sharpies on that table, and what we want to invite you to do as a church family is something that you feel comfortable with writing on that table, what God has done in your life this past year. We're actually going to have this table up for the next couple weeks so that our whole family can write on it, and what we will do is that will be the table that our church eats on throughout the rest of the year, and we'll have kind of a touch point each week of what God has done in this church family. So for example, as a church family, you all have walked with Randy and I through what family means for us over the past multiple years, right? And this year has been one where you guys have got to join with us in celebration of promises that God gave us a few years ago in a dark season. We've seen the fulfillment of that. That is something Randy and I will write on the table of God fulfilling promises to us as a family. And that's something as a broader church family we celebrate too. And I know there's multiple stories. You guys have been so gracious in inviting the whole church into your lives of what God has been doing in your hearts and in your communities. And those are the stories we want to share publicly too on the table. What's beautiful is just imagine as we continue to gather around food, imagine the curiosity that will provoke as new people come into our church. And as they're going through the food line, they see these testimonies written on the table and begin to ask the question, who wrote this? What was God doing in this season? Is God at work in my life too in this season? I know, speaking about the testimony Randy and I will write on that table, a few years ago, it was really hard to believe that God was at work. And so that is the purpose of an altar, to have a touch point that, yes, God is faithful even through the dark seasons. And we want, as a church family, to be encouraged as we continue in this call, this commission that God has given us to partner with Him in being a part of what God is doing in the city. So, Eric, I believe, will put on music, or is it Mallory? Somebody will put on music. Shake your paint markers. Remember what God has done.
Wow, that's unique. As a quick thing with the markers, you kind of have to put them down